Hello again, and welcome to a new video on transmission mechanisms. This can be a relatively tricky concept to understand, and mainly because students often mix up the different transmission mechanisms. But if you broadly step back and just kind of understand what they are first, and then which economic agent is primarily affected by each different transmission mechanism, it makes it really easy to structure your answer and fully understand these concepts. So, what is a transmission mechanism? Well, that essentially is ways that changes in interest rates affect the economy. And we've got that word transmission in there, and it kind of means moving from one phase to another. How, when interest rates change, that actually affects the spending behavior of economic agents in the economy. Remember, AD is the level of spending in the economy. So it's got to, your answer has to get to eventually a change in the behavior of spending. Okay, so let's talk about, and my face there is beautifully covered. I might just move that up there to the other corner so you can actually see. So the first one we've got here is the savings and investment channel. As the name suggests, it is affecting how expensive it is to either take out new loans, that's the investment part, or savings, the reward for savings. And the way we're going to structure this video is we'll just go with one way interest rates go, and we'll say here with the loosening of monetary policy. And that's the language we'd like you to use in your writing to refer to a fall in interest rates, a loosening of monetary policy. The economy is a bit looser. It can flow more freely because interest rates have fallen. So when there's a loosening of monetary policy, that means interest rates fall. It means, well, if you don't currently have a loan, but you're thinking of getting one, well, that becomes more attractive for you to get that loan. And for most people, when you borrow money, you're going to be spending that money. And then so that's how it transmits to an increase in spending in the economy. Likewise, on the other side, as I've got my friend the Crow outside, who agrees with me, if you have money in the bank, well, the bank is going to pay you a reward for keeping that money in the bank. And if the interest that you get on that your money that's in the bank falls, well, then relative to other options, that doesn't look like a very good option. And so the reward for saving will fall. And that also encourages more private consumption and investment in the economy. It encourages those that have money in the bank to take it out and spend it because there's a higher relative return elsewhere on other things. Both of these will increase aggregate demand as is an increase in private consumption and investment. Then we have the cash flow channel. So again, we've got a different economic agent, so we need to kind of switch our thinking. The cash flow channel is about those with existing loans. And that's the phrase I'd like to include in your writing, those with existing loans. And if we remember the purpose of interest rates, and those interest rates are essentially the cost of borrowing money. When you borrow money from a financial institution, you have to pay back the money you borrowed plus a little bit extra. That's the reason the financial institution, the bank, is going to actually give you the money, is that little bit extra. And if we go to the right-hand side here, when we've got a loosening of monetary policy, well, there's less interest payable on those existing loans. People still need to pay back the money that they borrowed, but the extra on top that the bank will receive is a smaller amount because the interest rate has fallen. If we think of a financial example, you might have $2,000 a month you have to pay back on your loan with an extra $200 of interest on top of that to the bank. So you're paying out $2,200 every month, $2,200, $2,200. But then there's a fall in the interest rates, which means you're still paying that $2,000 off the principal amount, but instead of paying $200 extra to the bank, you're only paying $150 extra back to the bank. So what do you think economic agents are going to do with that extra money? Well, I don't know about you, but I'm going to spend it. And so again, we have a change here to private consumption and private investment, both showing an increase in aggregate demand. So when we have a loosening of monetary policy, people have some extra cash lying around. And vice versa, when we have a tightening of monetary policy, that eats into other purchases that consumers can make, thereby decreasing levels of spending. The next one we have is the asset prices and wealth channel. This is probably, I think, the trickiest one to talk about. I would avoid talking about this one unless you are forced to talk about it in the question, or it's a larger mark question that requires you to talk through a few extra steps and a few extra ideas. This one is really a vibe. Okay, now stick with me on this one. So if we have a loosening, before I get to the structure, who this affects? Well, this affects consumer and business confidence. That's why it's a vibe, due to a change in the price of the assets that people hold and businesses. So the economic agent that this channel affects is those that hold assets. And this is how it works. If there's a loosening of monetary policy, for the savings and investment channel reason we just talked about, people are more likely to take out new loans. And what do people get loans for? Well, it's usually for purchasing of big assets. And so then the demand for the current existing base of assets is going to go up. The demand for those existing assets is going to go up. And if we think about it, if you are one of these asset holders that hold houses and investment portfolios and businesses and all this kind of thing, well, if there's more money circulating around the economy to buy these assets, well then if I were to sell, not when I sell, but if I were to sell, well then I'm going to get more money for it than I did before the interest rates went up. And so this is a business or consumer confidence vibe here of, okay, well my overall wealth position has improved. So you know what? What am I going to do? I'm probably more likely to go and buy that jet ski. I'm probably more likely to go out and buy and take my family on that holiday up to Darwin because I know the value of my asset portfolio, should I need to sell it, has improved because the demand for them at the moment is in a really strong position. You've got to go through a lot of different steps for this particular channel. You know, you've got to get through how more likely to consumers and businesses are more likely to take out loans. Then you make the link to the demand for assets going up. Then you make a link to the increased business and consumer confidence. And then you make a link to certain purchases by those holding assets are likely to be brought forward. And so there's a lot you've got to do here, so just tread carefully. The next one is the exchange rate channel. Students generally like this one for those that understand how exchange rates work. This one's a little bit different in the economic agent that this is going to change is those of overseas investors is where we'd like you to talk about. You can talk about Australian investors too, but I think it's easier to talk about overseas investors. Okay, so how does this one work? Well, if we have a loosening of monetary policy, our exchange rates are going to fall. As a result of that, those who can choose to invest in Australia, you know, those that have spare money in Australia, spare money overseas and are loaning to Australians, well, they're now getting a lower relative rate of return. They're looking around. So let's say you've got a Botswanian investor that has a whole stack of cash, and they're like, okay, well, who can I loan this money out to? I could loan it out to somebody in Australia where their interest rate has fallen, or I could loan it somewhere else where the exchange rate is higher. And then so the demand for those overseas investors, the demand for Australian currency is going to fall because they're no longer demanding our Australian currency to loan it out to us. They're going to loan it somewhere else. Similarly, and this is where you can talk about the behaviour of Australian investors, should you wish. I wouldn't do both overseas and Australian. I would just talk about one. But Australians who have a surplus of cash have a choice whether they loan that out to an Australian person or business or bank, or whether or not they loan that to an overseas entity. And if they're looking at their options, they're weighing them up and they're saying, okay, I could loan my money out to an Australian, which has a lower relative rate of return now, or I could loan it to that person that lives in that country over there. So I'm going to do that because I get a higher rate of return now, relative rate of return. So I'm going to supply my Australian dollars and therefore loan it overseas. Both of these functions, a fall in the demand for AUD or an increase in the supply of AUD, have the same result on the exchange rate. Both of these will depreciate, okay, the exchange rate. You can see there, fall in the exchange rate. As a result, our exports here are going to be much more affordable, and our imports are going to be more expensive due to that change in the exchange rate. And both of those also increase aggregate demand in the economy. So you notice the first three we went through was changes to C and I within the AD formula, and this one is a change in X and M, so just be careful about that. And here is just me covering up the words again. Whoa, that was fast. A summary of the relationships here. So the first one is the savings and investment, and this one is about those taking out new loans, but also those with cash in the bank. When we have a loosening of monetary policy, this is going to make new loans more attractive and therefore increasing C&I. Cash flow is those with existing loans. It's either going to increase or decrease the amount of kind of spare cash that people have, affecting their level of spending. Asset values is those with existing assets, and then the demand for their assets is going to go up or down based on if there's more or less demand for loans. And then the final one, it's about a relative rate of return of investors, either investors with spare cash in Australia or overseas investors wanting to invest in Australia. This middle box here, these are the key phrases that I'd like to see in your responses, as well as this bottom box down here is the economic agent that it affects. So hopefully that was useful. The biggest misunderstanding we have with these is mixing them up, especially savings and investment and cash flow, so be really careful about that. But once it all starts to stick and you understand this process of focusing on the economic agent who is primarily affected by this channel, then you're usually good to go. Thanks everyone. Bye-bye.